I booked a quiet night in a downtown hotel to catch my breath from a life that had taught me how to keep secrets. I did not expect a knock at the door, a young man with my eyes, and a single manila envelope that would force me to open the most tender, stubborn part of myself. What he revealed changed everything. From which cities are you watching us tonight? Tell me in the comments. I love hearing where you're tuning in from. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. The lamp beside the bed cast a soft pool of light, and through the slatted curtains the city lights shimmered like a far-off ocean. I had checked into this hotel for no other reason than to give myself a little distance, to sleep somewhere where the furniture didn't hold the shape of my life. 71 years collects impressions. The creak of a floorboard, the smell of my mother's soap, the weight of an envelope you never open. I had hoped for a gentle night, an evening of tea, a crossword, the kind of quiet that feels like a small, respectful friend. At 9:30, while I was tying my hair up in the crooked mirror, there came a soft knock. Not the casual knock of a maintenance man or the polite rapping of a broom. This knock had an edge of hope in it. I opened the door. He was taller than I expected. He looked like a photograph washed in sunlight. A man in his mid-30s, hair gone a little unruly at the temples, hands that trembled the way hands do when they are doing something important but are afraid they might break it. His name was Christopher. He said it as if he had been practicing the syllables in the small hours. He looked at me the way someone looks at an old map they cannot quite read, but are desperate to understand. "Mrs. Lane?" he asked, as if unsure what title to use for me. "Sarah?" I noticed first his eyes. They were a particular gray-blue I had seen once in a mirror years ago, a trait I had tucked away as if it were contraband. For a ridiculous second I thought of photographs and the one-night stands and the names that mean nothing until someone attaches themselves to them. Christopher held a manila envelope against his chest like it was a lifeboat. "Come in," I said, because the alternative, closing the door, would have been worse. He sat on the armchair by the window and smoothed his jacket as if ironing out the lines of a very nervous shirt. I made us tea because that's what my mother taught me to do for people who come bearing news, and because the ritual steadied me. The kettle sang, and the city hummed on the other side of the glass. "You're not expected," I said, wanting to sound practical, when really my throat felt like an attic door that hadn't been opened in decades. "I'm sorry to drop in like this," Christopher answered. "I didn't know where else to go. I have something that belongs to you." He put the envelope on the small table between us. It was sealed with yellow tape, the corners softened by time. On the outside, in a hand I recognized in an instant, because some handwriting survives memory like a stubborn plant, were my initials. S.L. I pressed my palm to the envelope as if to feel whether the paper contained air, or dust, or a heartbeat. There are moments in life when your past appears like a distant shore you thought you had left for good, and then, unexpectedly, a boat pulls up to the dock. "Who are you?" I asked finally, keeping my voice level but soft. I had to know. I had to hear it like a physician reading a chart. "I'm Christopher," he said. "My full name is Christopher Lane." He stopped, trying to gauge me. "I'm your grandson." Something in me tilted. My breath came shallow and quick. Grandson. The word landed like an echo in a cathedral. Memories rearranged themselves, faces I'd nearly forgotten, a period of my life folded into a drawer marked "Don't Open." I had kept many things folded away, sometimes by choice, sometimes by the bluntness of life moving on. But someone could not simply announce a relation and hand me a letter without the room changing its temperature. "You must have mistaken me for someone else." I didn't say it with hostility. I said it with the trembling disbelief of someone looking at a photograph of themselves when they were 30 and trying to remember the exact way they held a cigarette. Christopher reached slowly into his jacket and drew out a photograph. It was black and white, edges softened, Someone had taken it with a camera that insisted on exposure and patience. In the picture, a man leaned against a low fence, laughing at something off camera. He had my jaw, my stubborn mouth. I recognized him before I read the name penciled on the back, Daniel. I saw then what he saw, not only the face but a lineage written in bone. Daniel had been a name I had whispered once, only once, into the darkness of a young night. He had been the kind of love that made you young and foolish by the hour. He was the man who, in a single summer, taught me to love jazz records and the way light falls on a coffee cup. We had not spoken after that summer. I thought the world had closed the book gently. Instead, it had gone and written another chapter without my permission. Christopher set the envelope between us and said, "I know this is a lot. I know these things don't come the right way. But my mother, your son's daughter, collected things after he passed. She found letters, and she found creases in an old map with your name on it. When she traced a thread, she found you. Before she died, she asked me to find you and give you this. She said, 'If Grandma is still alive, you go.' My knees felt like soft fruit. I had been a woman who knew how to make decisions and how to live with them, but nothing had prepared me for the quiet gravity of being sought out. 'Your son,' I said, my voice blurred. 'My son is?' 'He was named Daniel, like his father,' Christopher said. 'He called himself David in some papers. He didn't want to make things messy for the family he lived with. He kept your letters for a long time. He left instructions. He took a while to become comfortable knowing he was part of two lives. He wanted us to have answers. He folded his hands in his lap as if to steady them. He told me in bits and careful sentences the story I had never been brave enough to hear aloud. My breath measured it. Daniel had grown up, had children, had made a life with a woman who loved him. He had carried the small, secret joy and the bitter ache of not knowing me. He had written to me sometimes, a short letter folded into a cigarette pack, a postcard mailed from a train platform. I had not replied to those letters. I had been young and frightened and married to a life that demanded clarity. Christopher's voice softened. He called me Christopher because he loved the name. He put your name in my name, in a way. I wanted to press my palm to his forehead and say, "It is all right." But a great many things are not all right, and a lifetime of choices does not unravel in a single evening. What we could do was sit in the shelter of truth and pick through the threads together. "Why now?" I asked. "Why the hotel? Why come here?" "Because this is where you were," he said simply. "I looked you up. I waited until I had paper I could offer you, documents, a photograph, and a letter from David." He produced another piece of paper, hands steadying at last. "He wrote to you. He wrote more than I ever expected." As he read, the room receded. The words on that page were my son's voice, unvarnished, full of the small humor I had recognized instantly. He remembered the chipped teacup, the song we danced to on a rain-drenched night, the coat I had knit him when he was too thin for winter. He wrote about regret and the selfishness of youth, about a life he had chosen and a life he had been asked to keep separate. He wrote of wanting his child, Christopher, to know where he came from, to understand the shapes of the people who made him. I listened. Tears blurred the letters into watercolor. This was not the dramatic reconciliation I had sometimes invented in secrets at 3 a.m. It was steadier, quieter, and more humane. The shock was not the revelation of a name, but the sudden, summer-bright clarity that things I had thought buried had taken root and grown in ways I had never imagined. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I managed to ask. "Because they didn't know how," Christopher replied. "My mother found his things after he was gone. She thought about it for a long time. She was afraid. People get used to the shape of their lives, and they fear the shape will change if they open a window. She didn't want to hurt you. She wanted you to be whole in your own way." Hurt? Whole? Those words, like small stones, landed and made ripples across the surface of something I thought impossible to disturb. For decades I had treated my past like a glass on a high shelf, visible, breakable, best left untouched. But life had a way of rearranging furniture when you weren't looking. We talked for a long time after that. He asked about the summer I loved Daniel. I told him in fragments. The bookshop on Elm Street, where we kissed between stacks of dusty biographies, the song that played when the two of us danced on a laundromat roof after a rain. He told me about growing up in a house where his father had taught him how to fix a leaky faucet and how to whistle the same tune that used to make me laugh. He spoke of visiting the cemetery, of looking at a grave and feeling both an absence and a fierce gratitude. When midnight crept up and the city's hum softened to a low murmur, the two of us sat in the lamplight and let the past explain itself. It did not apologize. It simply offered the facts. There were things to be sorted, photos to be scanned, names to be entered into family trees, phone calls to be made with care. There were also tiny immediate things. The way Christopher folded his hands, his laugh when he spoke of his son, the gentleness in him that made me think of my own father. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. It was a simple human gesture, entirely consensual and necessary. "I didn't come to take anything from you," he said. "I came because I thought you should know. I thought you might want to see that the people we lose sometimes keep pieces of us safe." I think what surprised me most was how unprepared I was for forgiveness, not because I was cruel, but because I had been too busy living to imagine anyone would want to forgive me for a life I had chosen. In his presence the old guilt softened. It did not vanish, but it became something I could hold and look at, and perhaps for the first time in decades, speak to. When he left that night, later, after we had laughed at the absurdity of trying the hotel's tiny bathtub, and then opted for glances instead of swims, he hugged me with the kind of careful, hopeful pressure that told me he would be back. He promised to call. He promised to send copies of the letters and the photographs. He promised, most importantly, to ask me questions about Daniel that I had never been brave enough to voice aloud. As the door closed, the envelope on the table lay like a small, honest island of paper. I sat down on the bed and let the city wash over me. The night felt larger now, not empty. There were threads to follow, people to reach out to, apologies to arrange, and stories to tell. I felt strangely and wonderfully like a woman at the edge of a map, finally willing to walk a little farther. There is more to say. There are conversations to be had with other family members, memories to reconcile, and 100 tiny practicalities that adulthood tends to hide in its sleeves. But as dawn began to suggest itself beyond the curtains, I realized a truth I had avoided for years. The past does not always punish us. Sometimes it brings grandchildren and photographs and letters that teach us how to be human again. If you're still with me, leave your city in the comments and tell me if you ever found a letter you didn't expect. I'll tell you more. There's another part to this, and when you're ready, I'll share what happened next. When I woke the next morning, the city outside my window was already stirring with the quiet chaos of traffic and early risers. The curtain glowed faintly with the pale light of daybreak, and for a moment I forgot the envelope on the nightstand, the knock at the door, the way Christopher had said my name as though it was both discovery and relief. Then I turned my head, and there it was, stubbornly present, like a witness waiting for me to speak. I lay still, hands folded on my stomach, listening to the faint hum of plumbing in the walls. 71 years had taught me that some mornings arrive with questions you cannot ignore. That envelope was one of them. Before I reached for it, the phone on the bedside table buzzed. A text message, strange enough, because most of my friends from church still preferred the old landline. The screen lit up with his name, Christopher. "Breakfast downstairs? I'd like to keep talking." I surprised myself by replying quickly, "Yes. 10 minutes." The dining room was a modest place with patterned carpet and the smell of coffee and buttered toast. Christopher stood as soon as he saw me, nervous as if he were asking me to dance. He looked like he hadn't slept, but there was a kind steadiness in his eyes. He pulled out my chair before sitting back down. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, pouring coffee into the chipped hotel mug. "But something told me if I didn't, I'd regret it." We sat for a long while, eating scrambled eggs that tasted of powdered mix, speaking carefully at first. He asked about the street I grew up on, and I told him about the lilac bush in our yard that smelled sweeter after a rain. He wanted to know if Daniel, his grandfather, had made me laugh. I told him about the time he tried to teach me how to whistle through his hands and only managed to scare a stray dog. The details spilled out, surprising even me. At one point, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I don't think you realize what this means to me. I've spent years feeling like half of me was written in invisible ink. Last night, hearing you, I felt like part of me became visible for the first time." That admission pressed against my heart like a weight both heavy and beautiful. I wanted to reach across the table, but instead I folded my napkin, steadying myself. "Christopher, I spent my whole life trying not to think about that summer. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was because caring felt dangerous. I thought burying it was protecting everyone, but maybe I wasn't protecting anyone at all." He nodded. Sometimes silence is its own kind of inheritance. Those words landed harder than I expected. I looked out the window at the commuters hurrying past with their briefcases, each of them carrying stories they'd never tell a soul. My coffee cooled, untouched. When breakfast ended, Christopher asked gently, "Could I walk you through something?" "My dad, your son. He left me a list of places. He called it his map of beginnings. I think some of them are yours too. Would you come with me?" I hesitated, fingers brushing the envelope in my purse like a talisman. Part of me wanted to retreat, to close the curtains, and pretend none of this had happened. But another part, the part that had wept when hearing his father's words, knew I couldn't turn away. "Yes," I said, and my voice felt steadier than I expected. The day became a quiet pilgrimage. We drove first to a park with a rusted fountain where Daniel used to take me on warm evenings. I hadn't been there in decades. The benches had been replaced, the trees taller, but when the wind moved through the branches it carried the same old hush. Christopher walked beside me slowly, giving me space, his silence respectful and patient. From there we visited the bookstore on Elm Street, though it was a cafe now, the shelves long gone. I told him how Daniel once read poetry aloud to me there, his voice breaking on certain words. Christopher listened intently, as though each word were a missing puzzle piece. At every stop, he carried himself with a gentleness I hadn't expected, not demanding, not accusing, just present. He wanted me to share, but he also wanted me to heal. And that made all the difference. By late afternoon, we ended up at the cemetery. He guided me to a grave marked with a simple stone, Daniel Lane, beloved father and friend. My knees went weak, and for a moment I thought I might collapse, but Christopher steadied me with a hand at my elbow. "I thought I'd be alone the first time I brought you here," he whispered. "I didn't know if you'd ever want this." I looked down at the stone, at the name etched into it, and I felt decades collapse into a single moment. My son, my boy I never knew. I bent down, touched the cool stone, and whispered his name like a prayer. Tears blurred my vision until the world became light and shadow. Christopher knelt beside me, his hand covering mine. His warmth anchored me. "He wanted you to know," he said. "Even if it took years, he wanted this." In that moment, I wasn't only mourning. I was grateful. Grateful that truth had finally crossed the years to find me. Grateful that this young man, my grandson, had chosen not to let silence finish the story. We stayed there until the shadows grew long. Before we left, Christopher turned to me. "I don't expect this to fix everything.